The link to Rumble is there. Everybody head on over and drop all the chat you want to drop there. Ending on YouTube in 3, 2, 1. Heading over to Rumble. See you all there. 2,500 people should be migrating if they're so willing. See you there. Robert. Okay, we're going to talk about it very briefly. Everyone has their opinion. Before we get into Nick Fuentes, Milo Yiannopoulos, and potentially some malevolent intentions there that are well documented because it came out of their own mouths quite publicly. What is your assessment of Kanye, mentally, spiritually, and from a legal responsibility perspective? Do you think he's all there? Do you think it's a troll? Do you think he genuinely believes it? Or do you think he's unwell?
I think your explanation is the more likely one, but I will proffer this alternative explanation based on what he said at the beginning of his conversation with Tim Pool. So, what was on his mind about why is he entering politics? Why is he entering public life? Why is he escalating his inflammatory rhetoric? Why is he associating with, hated and controversial figures like Milo Yiannopoulos and Nicholas Fuentes? For those that don't know, with Milo's, it was always controversial, but he was, the conservative, flamboyant, gay conservative that Steve Bannon and others helped sort of promote because he's very smart, very erudite, very well thought out Englishman. But along the way, he got caught saying things about how kind of he appeared to approve of groomer activity within the gay community. In other words, older gay men approaching minors, not minor children, but minors still. In other words, 14, 15, etc. Young teenagers that are not legally able to consent and grooming them for gay behavior. He seemed to approve of that. That led to his expulsion from mainstream conservatism. On his way out, he tried, and in the last year or two before that had occurred, he had been engaged in a wide range of blackmail activities, extortion activities, bragged about this online, things like this. Lauren Southern has gone into some detail about what she had to put up with from Milo. So there's legitimate. And then after that, he gets kind of expelled, tries to make a comeback initially in kind of what's called the Groyper white nationalist community. These are a lot of young men who were associated with Richard Spencer and then shifted to Nicholas Fuentes and then in part to Milo. Milo claimed to have converted away from being gay and that he was now a very Christian advocate. And during this stretch, he was doing things like trying to get death threats against Dave Rubin, things of this nature. So there's a reason why some of us have been highly critical of any association with Milo Yiannopoulos for quite some time. I met him when Steve Bannon invited me and some other folks up to the Republican National Convention in 2016. And when I was there, my first reaction was, this guy is an unreliable, untrustworthy person. Now, the other person Kanye's been really at the link with, because apparently Kanye terminated Milo this past week, purportedly because of Milo being Milo. Maybe for other reasons.
I had a joke because I had put out a tweet that said, if Kanye is sincerely bigoted against the Jews, does he not realize that Milo Yiannopoulos is, if not Jewish, has Jewish ancestry? I had a bunch of people, I think, correcting me in that they said Milo was not being forthright about his Jewishness. Other people were saying it's only his father, so they're sort of adhering to the traditional, if your mother's not Jewish, you're not Jewish. I don't even know what the truth is anymore. Do you know if Milo is either half Jewish, part Jewish, or not Jewish at all?
You said different things at different times, different people. So that's where the confusion arises. And so then it flipped over. So Nicholas Fuentes was a young Ben Shapiro wannabe in high school, had a contract with the Right Side Broadcasting Network. That just didn't work. He couldn't quite hit the Ben Shapiro style. It's tough to mimic that voice. That would be one takeaway. But either way, he wasn't getting the audience he wanted. Saw that the growth of the Richard Spencer movement that had attached itself to Trump World in 2016 and attended that at Charlottesville. So he was there at Charlottesville with his Trump hat, trying to get photographed everywhere he possibly could, etc. Somehow he's in the middle of all that, never gets arrested or sued, but that's another story for another day. Goes back home to Boston University, where he promotes again, hey, look at me, everybody. I went to Charlottesville. Please do something about it so I can be a martyr and a victim and play that card and get some notoriety. Finally, it works. He gets a little bit of notoriety, starts to tap into the race grift market. And that's an old market. He learns all the anti-Jewish tropes. He knows them almost backwards and forwards. He learns how to communicate them in subtle, indirect language so that the hardcore haters know exactly what he's saying, but the average person can think that doesn't quite get what he's saying. He blames Jews for COVID-19. He blames Jews for the Black Plague. He blames Jews for pretty much every single war. He blames, there's something out there to blame Jews on. Nick Fuentes finds a way to blame Jews for it. While people email me and text me that, oh, you misunderstood. It's like, no, you haven't been paying attention or you don't know. So that's who he is. He's a race grifter, race hater. Though I don't think he personally believes hardly any of it. Years ago, I debated him on Alex Jones's show because he kept complaining nobody would debate him, and debated him on Israel and whether we should side with the Israelis or side with the Palestinians. My argument was in the geopolitical best interest of the United States to side with Israel over the Palestinians because that's our only practicable alternatives currently in the Mideast debate. People can sincerely disagree with that. So where I disagree with some friends of mine on the right, including Ben Shapiro and others who are critical of Max Blumenthal and others who are very anti-Israel, I think way over the top anti-Israel. But I don't think it's because he hates Jews that he's anti-Israel. Might be some daddy issues there with Sidney Blumenthal. You could argue about that if you wanted. Mark Robert might have a point or two there. But there's plenty of people that disagree with aid to Israel on grounds of why being involved, period. There's people who, see Netanyahu wanting to get us involved in a lot of other wars in the Mideast, including Iraq and then now Iran, that have a very understandable criticisms. But I didn't believe that was where Nick Fuentes' criticisms came from. I believe his criticisms came from trying to tap the race grift to get the race haters to send him money, because that's been a nice grift going on for a long time. So that's who Fuentes is. And Fuentes exposed it. I was on with Alex Jones earlier today. Alex said, I had been preaching this to Alex, and I was like, I hadn't heard him say that until he was on the show. And then I was like, well, these people are nuts. And he starts, he goes, like, you might as well like to eat poo as much as to either be a commie, a fascist, or like Hitler. Alex was frustrated by what happened. He's like, I wanted an honest conversation. I think Kanye's an interesting guy, and I wanted to have an honest conversation about what he really thinks and where it comes from. Because Jones is intensely curious, not only very historically literate, but also intensely curious. And he said he just wouldn't give it to me. He said, he wore the mask the whole time. He's becoming a meme. And I'll give you the alternative. I think the most likely hypothesis is yours, Viva. I've seen it a lot. If anybody's been around Hollywood, people there's anybody hits their late 40s, early 50s. Mark Robert could probably speak to it. There's about 1 out of 3, 1 out of 4 that just flat out lose their minds. They just flat out lose their minds. So you can't rule that out, and that's probably the most probable explanation. There is a backdrop of Black Jewish hostility that relates to two things in America. One, urban American Democratic Party politics. Those competing for power disproportionately since 1955, 1960, is Black and Jewish political groups, right? So in Atlanta, New York, Chicago, other places, that's where a lot of it is. It's like the Italians and the Irish, or the Irish and the natives. And, that's an old contest, if you will. There's a bit of that. There's also a hostility within the music industry in the film industry, because as Dave Chappelle puts it, there's a good number of Jewish people out there. Just say it, as he puts it. He's like, Black people get together, definitely a gang. Italians get together, definitely the mob. A bunch of Jewish people get together, we're not supposed to talk about that.
It's a coincidence, and you can never.
That's where that joke comes from. But that's more sincere. That's not the I like Hitler nonsense and gibberish Kanye's been spewing. And he knows that. And so it's either he's lost his mind and he got associated with an idiot like Fuentes, and Fuentes is feeding him all this race grift nonsense, and he's just running with it. Because Fuentes is a smart kid. He's just a race grifter. Or it's what he said at the beginning of Tim Pool. Because when he sets down, something has been on Kanye's mind. And it's what Kanye explained is that he, as accountants had explained to him, he didn't give the exact time frame, that he owes at least $50 million in taxes. And he explained how they're coming after him potentially to put him in jail. And he even grabbed his arm about how that made him nervous. And then he bridged off to everything else. And I was like, well, if I was Kanye, and it turns out I got a big tax problem, criminal tax problem, what case would I look up, right? Is there a case out there, somebody famous, maybe even a black male celebrity famous, who was also accused of tax crimes, who mostly walked, didn't serve any real time? And like people out there say, Kanye would never do this because, he's losing $250 million business potentially. If he's to give people an idea, at $50 million, he's looking at 20 to 25 years in federal prison. He's looking at the end of his practical.
And if I can stop you there, first of all, is the person you're thinking about? It's not Wesley Snipes. Okay, now
that's exactly who it is.
Because I didn't know
that. You were to research. I mean, here you have a black male celebrity accused of tax evasion who mostly walked, who did 2 years at a minimum security work camp where he taught yoga and created a video game. That's Kanye's exit strategy if he is facing 25 years in federal prison. If he looked that up and only looked it up lightly, looked at the headline, stuff like that, he would see a common quote. And the quote was from our opening statement, which was, if crazy was criminal, half of Hollywood would be in prison. Now, that wasn't really the core of Wes's defense. It was that a lot of people were going to see crazy stuff, so we had to get ahead of the curve on that. But the core of the defense was a good faith reliance defense, which is unique to tax cases, which is, I sincerely believed what I was doing was legal. My guess is Kanye didn't indeed do a deep dive. If he did do a brief dive, he'd be like, man. And then he may have heard of the famous New York mobster who dodged trouble for a good number of years by pretending to be crazy. He went out in his thing and he did it. It was a famous case of him pretending to be crazy. And it working for a substantial time period. So Kanye might be like, hey, what if I convince everybody I'm totally nuts? Then they'll probably just drop me as a criminal tax case. Probably just move on. It appears to work for Snipes. It appeared to work for that mobster guy. So the best alternative explanation I can give for Kanye's behavior being in his own self-interest and rational is that it's a massive guise of faking being crazy so he doesn't go to jail.
As we say in Quebecois, Robert, tabarnak, is that a damn good idea? If that's going to be a novel above and beyond the simple, my explanation, people in the chat on Rumble are saying he's playing 4D chess or played 4D chess and failed. He was just trolling, yada. Mine is like grade 3 level hypothesizing. This is a 4D level chess hypothesizing. And is that to say, like, if you're accused of or found guilty to owe like 50 million, it's not just a question of repaying the 50 million plus back taxes and interest and whatever.
You would have bet that they would have told him that right away. In the federal system, that doesn't get you out at all.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's kind of fascinating.
And it's just why bring it up on Tim Pool? Why bring it up at all? Like, clearly, it's on the front of his mind, and Tim didn't know to pursue that. If I'd been right there, I'd have been like, let's talk about that.
Well, it's true, because if even from my perspective, I heard it and I was like, oh, okay, he owes 50 million. Well, that's a drop in the bucket compared to the whatever $500 million that he just lost. So maybe that's frustrating, but the idea is it would be criminal and therefore repayment is not an option as per his own admissions or fantasies, depending on which way you see it.
And guys like Kanye, because Wes was this way, think prison is like the movie Undisputed that he was in, Wes was in, but they think of it as hardcore because the people they know that are in prison are usually in state prison. Now, at that level, Kanye would be in a serious place, but not a too violent a place. That's all more of a state. But for someone like them, it terrifies him. And what was interesting is he said later that it really scared him for a bit. The way he gripped his arm showed that it was really ripping at him. And I was like, and nobody picked up on it. Like afterwards, like everybody was looking at, he walked off the set, all the rest. Nobody picked up on that part of his conversation. And I think now let's say that's your script. You're like, I got to come across as crazy. I got to convince people I'm crazy. The reason I didn't pay taxes is because I thought the Jews were going to steal it all to kill all the black people. That's why. Honest to God, I swear. Something like that. Whatever it is, some crazy script. And he's not getting the response he gets. People are taking him seriously at each place. They're like, this isn't working. Okay, I'll go on Alex Jones and get Alex to say, you're crazy. Then the world will understand, yes, I'm nuts. So if there's a sophisticated play, that's it. Sadly, the reality may be he has just lost it.
Well, that's Yeah,
Because
that's
I
why
don't believe he's a mean. No, Fuentes is a grifter. I get where he's doing. And for people that keep on yipping for Fuentes, watch him when Kanye starts praising Hitler. Watch Fuentes' head go up and down.
So
And the guy's a pure race grift, bottom of the barrel, David Duke wannabe. He should waste his time chasing little boys in furry outfits that he likes to do. That kind of behavior. But Kanye has never given off, at least as I could tell, malevolent, malicious vibes.
Well,
He knew what he was doing when he was saying this ridiculousness about Hitler. So
well,
I hope there's a wisdom behind all this.
And that's my thing. Like, it's like even bona fide bona fide, sincere, genuine anti-Semites don't act like that. Like it's not for lack of having run into people who genuinely harbor anti-Semitic beliefs. They don't run around saying, "I love Nazis, I love Hitler." They don't do that. No. But now that you say this, Robert, and you put that in conjunction with his latest Instagram post of accusing Elon Musk of being a half Chinese. What's the word?
Hybrid.
Hybrid is the word. I mean, I still go with my 2D level interpretation, but my goodness, did you just open my perspective as to what could be the case here? Nick and people in the chat, I've heard enough of Nick Fuentes. I don't. People can believe what they want. Yeah. The question really is: does the speech of Nick Fuentes create risks for real life violence, et cetera, et cetera?
Well, that's a good transition into, was Elon Musk's, there's two different analysis for Elon Musk. Did he make the right decision for Twitter versus was his decision First Amendment consistent?
Yeah.
I'll skip the first one for now. It's not First Amendment consistent because what Kanye posted appeared to be a swastika inside a Star of David.
Yep.
However, there's a wacky religious group that actually has transhumanist ties and is alien following that uses that symbol for completely different purposes, because many people don't know the Nazis stole the swastika. It was an old symbol that reflected and you find in other places and cultures long predating them. Now, who knows what Kanye was up to? And I get why Elon interpreted it the way he did. It's like that looks like and feels like a threatening kind of statement when I'm trying to get you to just chill out, bro. So I get that part, but is it imminent? Mere incitement to violence is not outside free speech.
Well, I mean,
imminent incitement is.
Was it even mere incitement? But let's and by the way, it's the Ralien. I talked about it briefly a few days ago. They actually settled in Quebec. The guy came from France, set up
really.
Yeah, it was.
All the crazies come from Quebec.
Well, he came from France. He came from Europe beforehand, so ended up in Quebec, and it was the Ralien symbol. But Robert, we're going to back up to another step here. We've discussed it before. We'll discuss it again. And it's what David French is busy talking about on Twitter as relates to the Twitter files and the underlying question. Does the First Amendment even apply in the context of Twitter, either sanctioning other people's content or imposing suspensions and whatever? Does the First Amendment even apply as a concept? It's a private entity imposing its own rules on users. Setting aside any form of government involvement, which we're going to get to with the Twitter files, I mean, does the question even get asked? I mean, it's not a First Amendment violation because the First Amendment has nothing to do with a private company imposing rules on Kanye.
Two different things there. My own view is that, yes, it is First Amendment subject to First Amendment scrutiny because it has monopoly power over the public square. So that's always been my position, is that the First Amendment does apply to private actors in certain contexts. One of those contexts is when they have a de facto monopoly over the public square or some part thereof. Twitter does. They have, in that particular kind of space, compared to Parler and Getter and Truth, they have well over 70% of market share. And so now the courts have not adopted that position outside of very limited circumstances. California has only applied it to like malls, and the U.S. Supreme Court has only applied it to company towns. They haven't. I think the logic should extend, but they've refused to extend it. Now, so then the position is what Elon said, which was it's not a First Amendment violation if Twitter does it. It is a First Amendment violation if the government asked Twitter to do it. I think that's right. Now, the degree of government involvement, courts have been inconsistent about how much they're requiring. Is it merely request? Is it coercive? Is it inducement? Is it an actual order? so on and so forth. And we're seeing, we saw the Fauci's deposition was released today. I'm going to do a highlighted version and post it up at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. And so, and also I even got, where did Hitler really come from? A little hush hush that I did that's currently up at vivabarneslaw.locals.com. May surprise some people who was originally backing Dear Adolf and where he actually came from. It wasn't the public democracy that put Adolf in power. It wasn't the public will of the Germans, 2/3 of whom never voted for Hitler, who put him in power. It was somebody and some other individuals. But so I think that if Twitter does it by itself under the current court's jurisprudence, it will not be considered First Amendment violative. What is shocking by the other depositions being taken in the Twitter files, and this will be a good transition to that topic, is the degree to which the government has been colluding, conspiring, coordinating, coercing Twitter to suspend. So I don't think his suspension of Kanye is First Amendment consistent. It's not. What Kanye did was not imminent incitement. It was sufficiently vague to be subject to multiple interpretations. Someone couldn't even sue for defamation on the basis of it because it's so vague and subject to varying opinions. The symbol being used. I get why Elon did it. Elon took it as a shove off to Elon, and he was like, "Well, I'm not going to keep defending you if you're just going to keep escalating in ways that create a nightmare while I'm trying to take over to transition this company into a more transparent space." But from a First Amendment perspective, nothing Kanye did violated law that's unprotected by the First Amendment.
Well, my issue is setting aside First Amendment issues. From a community guidelines or terms of service, it's not even clear what rule it broke. I mean, the APEC logo for the APEC summit in 2022 in Thailand has the form in it. It's called the Hakenkreuz, which is the older version or the original term for what the Nazis co-opted as the swastika. And I knew that whole history. That the Hakenkreuz in the APEC 2022 summit, it looks exactly like another form. No one's going to take that as a threat. And then in which case is Elon imputing suggested threat into it, in which case it's very subjective and not objective whatsoever. Yeah. But when we'll get to Fauci actually in a second, because the different levels of government involvement, as relates to the Twitter files, the Friday night fiasco, not a fiasco, but the feeding frenzy on the internet. French's position, and I guess in law he's probably more right than wrong, is that, well, he says it's not only not a First Amendment violation, it's the exercise of the First Amendment by a private company doing X, Y, and Z. My question is, okay, you have a provision for coercion. When the government coerces a private entity into action, it can and will be deemed to be a First Amendment violation issue. I'm not familiar enough with the case law in the States, but I suspect French might win on the merits of this, just because when the FBI comes and says, watch out for censorship, you don't want to have any problems, and then you adhere to their warnings. Well, nobody was coerced, nobody was bribed, nobody was threatened. But I think most people would say that there's something of a veiled threat in there. What is the threshold? How much has it ever been tested under American law? The idea of bribery, the idea of suggested coercion, suggested extortion, suggested threats. Because when the FBI sits Zuckerberg down, he says, yeah, they sit me down and I take it seriously. It's the FBI. And so I act accordingly. That's indirect coercion. I mean, has it ever been recognized under U.S. constitutional law?
Yeah, it has in a multiple context. So inducement can be considered government action, sufficient to bring it within the First Amendment scrutiny. And coercion has been. For example, the case that's currently pending that's disclosing all this discovery, the court found that these two state governments sufficiently alleged that the government had ordered, coerced, or induced a various suppression and censorship of speech that violated First Amendment rights. So and at least sufficient to get to the discovery stage of the case. So that live case is proof of that. The one of the big cases that went up was the Bantam Books case. So that was an agency that wanted a book to be banned, wanted certain materials to be banned, but didn't have the power to do it at all. And yet the U.S. Supreme Court said that was sufficient government action to constitute grounds to sue. So there's a suit. Robert Kennedy has a case going up against Elizabeth Warren, going up into the Ninth Circuit, about her threatening Amazon if they went and published his book. We'll see. We'll find out. Courts have tried to water that down since then. to allow the government to do a lot of illicit activities, but the government's been clearly lying about a lot of this. I mean, what the FBI agent admitted was they had weekly meetings recommending certain people be taken down.
Yeah.
If you're any private company, do you really ignore the FBI that can put your executives in prison, or do you just do whatever they tell you? I mean, that's where David French is in delusion. Now, I personally am not for corporations having the same rights as individuals. I don't. That's contra to America's founding history. Corporations were specially chartered, privileged entities that got special immunities for its founders and investors and its employees in exchange for certain obligations that were distinct. So I'm not the corporate whore that David French is when he's not busy being a war whore. But but his obsession with the free, as the Fifth Circuit pointed out, there's limits to that that ability, and when it is and isn't really necessarily their speech that is even at issue in many contexts. So there's a lot of rebuttal of it but if he was right, then all the laws prohibiting Western Union are violate the First Amendment. All the laws limiting utilities violate the First Amendment. All the laws limiting phone companies violate the First Amendment. French has not been able to articulate a standard that says, yes, it's okay to regulate their speech, so-called speech, when they censor or can't censor, but somehow it's horribly offensive. I mean, who knows how much he's really getting, whether he's getting paid money directly or indirectly.
Well, but he's living under the same veiled threat. If you don't toe the line, you get excommunicated or worse. But the idea, he says, it's not a First Amendment issue. It's a private company exercising their freedom of speech to censor. It's either ignoring or pretending it doesn't happen because it wasn't totally fleshed out in the Twitter files release. It was in the Intercept article. They've admitted sitting down with Twitter, Facebook, Microsoft, big tech, weekly, flagging users, flagging posts, flagging content, and then to pretend that if the FBI sits you down or potential regulators or who was it, Manchin says, we're going to investigate your company if you start doing this. I mean, that is the government coercing action of a private entity to pull it against individuals. The other question, Robert, actually, before I forget, French's argument is that the DNC is a private political party, private political entity, therefore not a branch of government, not an arm of government. And therefore, even if the DNC comes in and says, hey, Twitter, would you take that down? And Twitter complies, that's not First Amendment coercive state action. Something about that seems unpalatable to me, but I don't know.
I mean, it depends. I mean, the DNC is a private organization and can do what they want to a certain degree. That issue has come up in the election context quite frequently. So, for example, when the Democratic Party in Texas and other southern states was creating all-white Democratic Party caucuses and thereby dictating who could get the Democratic Party ballot, then the court ultimately interfered and said that wasn't purely private action like they claimed. So again, it's not always with these organizations that have deep ties to elected officials, help create et cetera. When exactly they're purely private and not purely private is not an open and shut question the way he presents it as.
Okay. And now I haven't seen the Fauci stuff at all, but people are hypothesizing if the Twitter files released the government involvement in the Hunter Biden story, it's going to be exponentially worse as to their involvement in censoring COVID, misinformation, disinformation. What were, in as much as you've gone through it, what were the highlights?
Well, there's overlap. So the same guy involved in Russiagate, the general counsel to James Comey, Jim Baker, was also the general counsel for Twitter, coordinating the suppression of the Hunter Biden story. And then you have the overlap of FTX, which according to Elon Musk, he believes FTX gave over $1 billion to the Democratic Party, laundering money for the war in Ukraine, laundering money to attack ivermectin, laundering money to support censorship of COVID, laundering money to get special Democratic get-out-the-vote operations, laundering money to create various fake sites. Then you have the Secretary of State of Arizona governing her own election for governor, who is secretly conspiring with Twitter to remove her critics and people exposing election fraud in Arizona. So it goes deep, it goes broad, it goes wide. The biggest disclosure to me Fauci apparently pled, I don't know, almost as many times as Hillary did. So it was like 179 times. Imagine if Alex Jones had said, I don't know, 179 times. They would have locked him up, not just given a default judgment. They would have put him in prison, said he committed perjury, obstruction of justice. But Anthony Fauci, this high-ranking government official, can't even answer where his emails came from. Can't even answer what he knew at certain time periods. Couldn't even give one single study to justify anything he ever did during his deposition. It is an embarrassment to public health. And then you find out the FBI, high-ranking FBI officials were the lead people suppressing the Hunter Biden story and other stories, which comes out of both the deposition discovery and comes out of the Twitter files. The FBI was the lead at getting these things crushed and quashed. And it helped that they had their high-ranking coup plotter from 2016 as the legal counsel, general legal counsel of the Twitter.
Robert, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there. One thing I want to unpack before we forget about it, the laundering. I mean, Elon has suggested $1 billion through FTX, through various. So there's the 40 million from SBF himself that he donated. If it's not 90% of it, because that was one of the figures I saw, it was the full 40 million. Two other executives, something like 30 some odd million. Then you've got the Mind the Gap that his mother's entity, Get Out and Vote, which apparently raised 140 million. Are you familiar with the interplay between FTX and its various organizations and how their involvement with the raising of 140 million for Mind the Gap, if there is any? Because I was under the impression that go for it.
Yeah, I would say we don't know because this is what people can track in public filings. So that what they can't track is all the shadow money, the dark cash, and the money that was filtered through multiple entities. Like people are trying to figure out, Warnock in Georgia has apparently got tons of donations from unemployed people in the state of Washington. And it's like, why is that? That looks like it could be laundered donations. In other words, someone else really making those donations and laundering in other people's names to stay under the limit. But I think Musk's belief is not without justification. That if you have a scenario where 200 million or so went in combined that you can track and trace, suggesting $1 billion is just that there's 4 times of that was in the shadows is highly likely. And so this would be one of the biggest. I mean, Nixon got into trouble for taking $50,000 donations. This is $1 billion laundered in that implicates both COVID suppression, censorship, and implicates Ukraine, the Ukrainian conflict, and whether government money was even part of this. And so this is a guy who was protected by the FTC, CFTC, protected by the SEC, protected by the White House, had high-end meetings with all three, including the head commissioner in different places at different times, and still hasn't been arrested, and is is giving interviews all over the place. And the New York Times and the US are writing puff pieces about him. They basically, Democratic Party found themselves a Bernie Madoff to launder maybe $1 billion to Democratic campaigns to salvage off the defeat in 2022. And in the process, they covered up for this guy. And then now they're going to use his own corruption to go after Bitcoin, a competitor to the central bank digital currencies and the central bank currencies in general. So it was a deep state money laundering machine that makes BCCI look like it was amateur hour.
Robert, I'm going to pull this up just to show everybody here. I mean, it would be a joke if it weren't so damn serious. Rep. Maxine Waters, we're looking at the same thing. I found my tweet made it into another article today. Rep. Waters says, SBF Sam Bankman-Fried _ FTX. We appreciate that you've been candid in your discussions about what happened at FTX. They're thanking this guy for his candor when he has text messages with that journalist admitting that he lied for PR purposes. They're thanking him for his candor. Your willingness to talk to the public will help the company's customers, investors, and others. To that end, we would welcome your participation in our hearing on the 13th. This is Maxine Waters, not a parody account. Maxine Waters invited. Thank you for your candor. Would you be so kind? I mean, if only Steve Bannon got this treatment or Roger Stone. He replies to her, Rep. Waters and the House Committee on Financial Services Once I have finished learning and reviewing what happened, I would feel like it was my duty to appear. Yeah, duty before the committee and explain. I'm not sure that will happen before the 13th, but when it does, I will testify. To which I said, that'll be good enough for Rep. Max Waters. When you're ready, Sam, take your time. Take your time. You've been very good to Democrats, like delightfully good. And here's one report where 39.7 million SBF donated in 2022 alone. Apparently 10 million in 2020. His mother's entity down there, Barbara Freed, has something to do with the Democrats as well. According to a report in the New York Post, she's a law professor at Stanford and co-founded the Democratic Action Committee Mind the Gap, which has raised 140 million this election cycle, which is something like, I think it's sevenfold what it was the last election cycle. He'll get around to testifying whenever he gets the chance. Robert, the COVID laundering stuff, I haven't been able, I could see some of it. That the idea behind that is that Sam Bankman-Fried, through FTX.org, they started philanthropic, not-for-profits or charitable organizations who were funding, grants, financing, awards, whatever, research. And from what I've been told, but I haven't been able to verify this with my own eyes, so I remain not skeptical, but I would not repeat it as fact, apparently was funding studies that were used to discredit other treatments, early treatments that have been discredited. Do you have any firsthand knowledge of those allegations?
Yeah, it's definitely the case that he was suppressing ivermectin. And in censoring access to ivermectin, which again was the most affordable, most effective early prevention treatment available. But it wasn't on. It didn't line up any drug company mass profit, so that's why it got suppressed, and it deterred vaccine development. In fact, legally precluded it from being developed because there was no emergency need for it if ivermectin worked, and so thus there was a massive campaign against ivermectin. The people like Alec Berenson and others were happy to campaign and be part of that campaign as well. But yes, there was direct money for there, no question. He came on my radar screen a few months ago when Politico did a front page cover story about the secret big Democratic donor and how his whole obsession, though, was to be on both sides because they didn't say he was doing any of this for crypto. They said he was doing all of this to stop the next pandemic. So he had his brother running a big anti-pandemic, so a lot of money funneled through there. And then his aunt sits on the World Economic Forum's public health response. So, I mean, you couldn't get more deep state than this kid. And most of the people that are aligned with him, and everything about it screams this was a personal deep state piggy bank serving deep state causes. And how far, and it's amazing, FTX is not being investigated. They're still harassing Trump. It shows you the insanity and imbalance of what's taking place.
Robert, someone in Pamela Walker. Hold on, I just don't want to I missed the Rumble rant. Pamela R. Walker, good, I remembered, asks, do you think Elon is in danger? And what about whatever is happening between him and the government before and what about whatever was happening between him and the government before this? But Robert, let me just pull up an article because I love it. There's some blue check marks on the interwebs who always cry about the mean private DMs that they get, now laughing at Elon Musk, suggesting that Elon Musk claims risk of his assassination is, quote, quite significant. And there's people, I won't say what's in their profile pictures or bios or descriptions, but it fits the bill, are now laughing at this.
Well, the way Musk put it is he wasn't going to be doing any open air parades anytime soon. So there's definitely that risk. And some people had asked, is there a connection on our locals live chat at vivabarneslaw.locals.com? To answer quickly the three questions there. First one, is there any connection between Berenson and FTX? Three, yeah, I'll give you one. It also has three letters in it, like SBF's name. It's called CIA. That's the connection between the two. If you dig in a little bit, could Kanye have other defenses like a reliance on accountant defense? Absolutely. The impression I got was that he hadn't done a deep dive on that for some reason. I don't know why, but because again, if he dug in, Snipes wasn't acquitted of most of the charges against him and all the felonies, half the misdemeanors, because of being crazy, quote unquote. It was because he asked questions and the government didn't answer. The crazy part was to deal with certain statements made that a jury might interpret as crazy. And that was a great line, by the way. You know, if crazy was criminal, half of Hollywood would be in prison. That was just beautiful. I still love that line. I came up with it. That's why I love it. But and to the third question, any consequences for Fauci or any of these people that are getting caught in the probably not for them personally, legally, but it may lead to a court issuing further orders to prevent the government from doing what it's been up to in that suit brought by the attorney generals of Louisiana and Missouri, one of whom, that attorney general from Missouri, is about to be in the United States Senate, Eric Schmidt. So credit to him for pursuing these cases.
Amazing. Let me. I'm just going to pull up a couple of rants on Rumble, and then I'll do the rest tomorrow because I got a bunch. You know what? No, forget it. I'll do them tomorrow because I can't pull them up in the order in which they came. Yes. So Sam Bankman-Fried will testify when he's good and ready. There's been no arrest, no extradition, no nothing,
no seizure of assets, no seizure of assets. Okay? I mean, if this was a Trump scam, then they would have locked up. They would have locked up Trump already. But you can guarantee they would have seized all the assets. They're seizing his assets for not defrauding anybody in New York. And here, there's been no effort that I'm aware of for them to seize any of his assets. I get he's filed in bankruptcy, so theoretically that freezes things, but that doesn't seize things legally. It's amazing the U.S. government is completely asleep. It's because they don't want to dig into wherever it is this takes them.
That's enough to give you a black pill, Robert. So
we got a big case of the Supreme Court about speech.
Oh, so this is a very interesting one. This is like the sequel to that poor, and I'm saying the poor baker. I forget in what state they were in. Colorado, where they were being told, bake my cake, paint my fence. This is like Krusty the Clown from The Simpsons. That cake baking scenario. Robert, I just don't understand why the Supreme Court decision didn't resolve that the last time. Way back in the day, back in the early days of the car vlogs, there was the case of the bakers who refused to bake a cake with a specific message for a homosexual couple, I believe, getting married.
Yeah, it was gay marriage. He would do any kind of cake, just he wouldn't do a gay marriage cake.
They would sell any existing cake they had in the shop. The patron said, "We want this cake with this message." They said, "We're not putting that message on. It goes against our beliefs." That case, I remember. This is the early stages of the Viva Red Pill. When I discovered the dishonesty in the reporting on that case, where they were saying discrimination, they refused to serve a gay couple, and I was like, I feel like I'm going crazy because I'm like, that's not what happened at all. It was the idea that they refused to put on a specific message, be mandated to create a specific work, but ultimately their defense was upheld. I forget. I'm not fully familiar with what happened afterwards because they were targeted again for a different religious reason. That's not the one that's currently going to the Supreme Court?
It's state of Colorado though.
Okay.
So it's somewhat similar to a web designer. And so she just won't design web pages that promote messages she disagrees with. And so Colorado has called that discrimination. That now that they get to have state coerced speech under the guise of anti-discrimination laws. Now, she hasn't discriminated against anybody. She didn't say, hey, because you're gay, I won't serve you. Nothing like that. If a straight person came and said, I want this particular message on my website, she would say, no, I don't promote that particular message. If this case is, if Colorado's law is affirmed, to give people an idea, Nazis could seek out, neo-Nazis in America could seek out Jews in America and demand they promote and put up and design a Nazi website, a Holocaust denial website. They could seek out survivors of the Holocaust, like the Nazis did in 1978 and were marching through Skokie, Illinois. Why Skokie, Illinois? It was the highest concentration of Holocaust survivors in America. That's why they picked it. And force them to do it. That's how outrageous this is. This is Colorado showing what California looks like, just a little bit with, add a few mountains. And to me, it's clear First Amendment violation, but there are some disturbing questions from the left-leaning justices today on the Supreme Court.
And before we even get there, my question about the Colorado baker is, I thought that went to the Supreme Court and resolved the issue.
It did, but they didn't. They made it fact-specific. They said because they said this and said that, and that they should have ended it there, but they didn't. So they're going to have to take this case to stop this.
Okay, and this one is about someone who wants a web page set up. I think it's for something related to. Is it related to trans ideology?
I think something like that.
I think the specifics are now, but Robert, the specifics might be relevant for one reason, because I imagine, like I was trying to think of an analogy. If I went to this place and said, "Make me a cake that says I hate my mother," something I'm trying to think of something PG-13, and they say, "No, I'm not doing that. That's a terrible message. Get the hell out of here." No one would ever blame them. The issue is going to be they're going to say, "I'm asking them to put in a message of a protected class, a message relating to a protected class." So your analogy of the Nazis asking a Jew to make a, I don't know, I don't want to say anything really bad, to make a cake that says, I love Kanye could ask them to make the cake. The court could say that's not a protected religious, gender expression, etc. ideology. So private actors can be compelled to make certain speech when it pertains to protected classes, but not when it pertains to just non-protected messages that they find offensive.
And that's what they should clarify has never been part of the law. The First Amendment. The First Amendment does not allow the state to compel speech ever, period. Doesn't matter how, right someone might think that speech is. So that's not part of, and no one has a First Amendment right to force someone to do so either. So the anti-discrimination laws were supposed to be, you don't deny me access to a service because of some protected position. That's very different than coerced speech. You now have to give the speech that I like because I'm part of a protected class. The latter has never been part of it. That's what the court should be made clear. The liberal justices clearly couldn't understand that distinction. I mean, KJB or KBJ, whatever it is, she sounds like an idiot on the bench, frankly. She'll probably end up like Kamala Harris, our dumbest vice president ever, which is saying something when you had people like Dan Quayle and others. But now you're gonna, she may end up being with one of the dumbest Supreme Court justices we've had, because she made a comparison to It's a Wonderful Life that made zero sense. That like at the end of it, she asked a question that doesn't relate to the stat. She says, "Well, what about It's a Wonderful Life?" And because all the kids in that movie are white. Well, by the way, it was a black and white film, but okay. All the kids in that film are white. I make some photos that all the kids are white, and I only sell them to white kids. Is that it's like, well, okay, that's a totally different scenario. You're only selling them to white kids. You're discriminating on who you sell. It's like that has no analogy at all. In fact, it appeared to believe that she thinks It's a Wonderful Life is a secret white supremacist message. That's how nuts this.
Whoa, Robert.
I always said judges look like the person who put them there. And that's what we're going to get. We're going to get lunatic lefty types who are really, really dumb, just like Joe Biden on the bench, it appears.
And just so everybody's clear, when Barnes says looks like ideologically, intellectually, because I was reading some of the comments as well. The idea that they were analogizing it to saying, well, we don't want to live in a world where people can refuse to serve to gays, to blacks, to Jews. It's like, it's not even the question at issue here, as the other, whoever's arguing the opposite side.
In fact, what they don't realize is they're actually making that legal, that the state could coerce that. The state could say, for example, it could be considered a religious statement being anti-Jewish, right? Now you can coerce it. I mean, it's an insane speech. There's always been a difference between equal access to services and compelled speech. Those two things are totally different. The left try to conflate them. They did that. They're completely distinguishable. I think the Supreme Court will draw a hard line, make it clear you cannot coerce speech under the guise of protecting certain groups from discrimination in essential services.
Yeah, what's it going to be, Robert? 6'3", 5'4"? I mean, is it going to be
6'3"? Maybe Roberts will say something grandstanding as a concurring opinion or whatnot, but the majority will be. They didn't take it unless they planned on reversing what Colorado was doing.
Okay, I mean, it's to me, it's black and white. It couldn't be. The idea is nobody's being denied any service. You want a template for a website? Take it. You want to put your own message? Do it. But you're going to make me perform a specific act for you, which I don't believe in. Take what we have, and if you don't like it, goodbye. Nobody's being denied service, period.
Exactly.
All right. What does that segue into, Robert? I know which one I want to talk about eventually.
Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Seditious conspiracy, Robert. They're batting 100. They're batting 100. I don't know. They're batting 99 because there was that one lucky schnook who got off because he got a judge that said yeah, when the cops wave you in, Rhodes, Oath Keepers, and his other partner, it's not the first time in American history, but damn well close that someone's convicted of seditious conspiracy.
I mean, it's been a long time. The first time they came around was Alien and Sedition Acts, early by the Federalist types, in the early under John Adams, and the Thomas Jefferson and the Jeffersonians quite correctly rejected it, and they said this was a patent violation. It was misused and abused to target political critics and opponents. And when Jefferson got in, he pardoned and commuted a bunch of sentences and got rid of those laws, so they were not on the books anymore. Tried little bits of it during the Civil War. The next big effort was during World War I, where they locked up a congressman from Milwaukee, Victor Berger, locked up Eugene V. Debs for just giving a speech opposing the war. So they did the Palmer raids in the name of it, deported a bunch of people. So that's how J. Edgar Hoover got his start, was through the sedition laws. And they were controversial at the time. They have always been used to target political speech. They're basically old school criminal libel statutes that say you can't criticize the government. That's what they really are. And that's what Stuart Rhodes was convicted of, because I think they found him not guilty of doing anything actually obstructive. And this was a lefty DC jury, which means the evidence was so bad there was no evidence they could convict on those grounds. And convicted him on seditious conspiracy, which means they convicted him based on speech, based on text, and it's ridiculous. I mean, the sedition laws should be struck from the books. They've always been problematic. They've always been weaponized against political dissidents. They've always been used to cover up corruption in government. They have no business being on the books. Thomas Jefferson was right. They're foreign and anathema to American liberty and constitutional republic. But, their particular application here with a biased jury pool, with a corrupt group of prosecutors who hid evidence of how many FBI agents had infiltrated, how many rats and informants were part of the operation around this. The evidence at trial didn't support any of the allegations that the Oath Keepers were leading any effort to overthrow the government. That's absolutely absurd. They actually protected people that were there. They protected Capitol Police that were there. Many of them tried to mitigate any consequences. That's why you get these wild verdicts. This is, rather than just rubber stamp convictions, the evidence was so overwhelming that even a bunch of lefty juries were like, well, we won't convict them of everything, and that will show we're not total frauds.
And 3 other defendants did not get convicted on seditious conspiracy. Before we even get into the infiltration of the FBI or intelligence, law enforcement into this seditious conspiracy, despite their statements that they had no advance warning anything was going to happen, get there in a second. If is my understanding correct? Despite all of this, they got their seditious conspiracy charges. Now they've got their conviction. Seditious conspiracy and insurrection are 2 separate criminal charges. Seditious conspiracy relates to words and planning, and insurrection relates to actual violence committed in the attempt to overthrow. I'm not wrong about that, correct?
Right, no, correct.
Okay.
And there's no insurrection charges that have ever been brought here.
So despite the fact that some liars out there are still referring to this as an insurrection and then citing now they have their conviction for seditious conspiracy under the belt, 2 separate charges, one of which is seditious conspiracy basically is words and planning. Insurrection would have been actual violence in the attempt to overthrow. Okay, good. I feel smarter as a result of that, and I can not have to go back and clarify a tweet. This is the bigger point, Robert. I believe it became known during the trial that Rhodes' Oath Keepers had been infiltrated long before. I mean, they had infiltrated. Again, there's a little bit of the Whitmer question as to how much of this is actually spontaneous creation from the accused and how much of this is sort of egged on or exacerbated by the foilers. But the FBI said they were caught off guard by the violence, the insurrection, despite the fact that they were allegedly and in fact had infiltrated this seditious conspiracy to overthrow the government, knew about it. Capitol Police understaffed as a result of COVID and whatever, don't take the National Guard. Robert, how does one reconcile all what is now evidence versus statements without coming to the conclusion that this was a setup from day one? They knew damn well it was understaffed, if not on purpose, by design, and it was a trap. How does one reconcile all of this to not come to that conclusion?
It was the first ever hush-hush, was that everything about this screamed inside job, that this was, that there would be informants, infiltrators, instigators, from the government, and that the government wanted it to happen, that the government actually wanted worse things to happen. As Darren Beatty at the Revolver keeps pointing out, no one has explained why they have never found the person who planted the bombs. The bombs were the ones, that bombs that never went off, by the way. Bombs that were the pretext, actually, for the evacuation of Congress. It wasn't the rowdiness of the crowd outside. It was that they were told, members of Congress were told, that there were bombs inside the House, and there weren't. To panic a whole bunch of people that then walked back their votes to challenge and contest the election. So it was designed, first of all, to prevent that's the other irony here. All of these people that they're accusing of crimes, they were trying to get Congress to do their job. They were not trying to stop Congress from doing their job. They were there that day for Congress to exercise their constitutional authority and constitutional obligation to assure the election was done in a constitutionally correct manner, with serious allegations having been raised, including a case brought before the U.S. Supreme Court that they chose not to hear, that was joined by over 20 attorney generals and joined by over 150 members of Congress. In that context, it was their affirmative duty to investigate and inquire, and that's all they were there for. And so it's a weird deal. It's like there's a conspiracy to force Congress to do its job, and so now they must all go to jail and prison for life. That's really it's the system's fear of it, but also the system's desire to marginalize those who challenged, questioned, and contested the election results by associating them with violence and turmoil, which was deeply ironic given that is what, in fact, they had been doing the whole summer before. All those people that did those riots outside the White House that led to more than 60 Secret Service agents and federal officials being hurt and injured. Remember the attacks on Rand Paul when he was trying to just walk out of a get-together meeting? None of those people were ever prosecuted. In fact, many of them were written checks by the federal government. And yet here people that left their guns at home, that was their grand seditious conspiracy to leave their guns at home, go in unarmed to the Capitol and seize the government. Yeah, it's patently ludicrous. And the only people who can believe this are the nut jobs who listen to Rachel Maddow.
I forgot to mention that whole part that they left their firearms, which they brought. I presume they bring firearms because they're legal in America, and they left them at the hotel. But they were planning to go back and get them if things got out of hand in their seditious conspiracy for insurrection. Robert, so bull crap. It goes to appeal.
Yeah, but D.C. Court of Appeals has been weak. So the reality is the only two real remedies are the House opens up meaningful investigations and inquiries that exposes a lot of this misconduct by the Justice Department and by the Capitol Police and others now that they have control of the House. The other is that a new president get elected in 2024 who pardons him in 2025. Practically speaking, it's unlike the U.S. Supreme Court may take up some of these cases, the sedition case, the obstruction case, to clarify the law on it. But they're too big of wusses to actually get meaningfully involved and invalidate the verdicts writ large.
And that's like, I've never practiced criminal law. I just know that overturning a jury verdict it's virtually impossible. The question is, was there a constitutional challenge for void for vagary?
Oh yeah, there were challenges on the sedition laws and obstruction laws not being applicable to this circumstance. So that, in my view, were legally valid that one court already has agreed with. So they brought these charges when they knew the court they had would go along with it. And so that's the nature of the government was, parading and Attorney General Garland personally went down and congratulated them on these bogus convictions. Meaningful inquiries against Garland should go all the way back to how he handled Oklahoma City. Because that was, it's not a coincidence. We have the same Attorney General talking about domestic insurrection and involved in questionable activities of questionable informants, hiding evidence related to it, etc., wanting to use it as a pretext and premise to strip people's liberties, which Joe Biden was the one proposing the first Patriot Act back at the time of Oklahoma City. People forget that because it didn't pass at the time. It came back after 9/11, quite conveniently. These are outrageous cases that make a mockery out of American justice. Speaking of election contests, it looks like Carrie Lake is about to file the mother of all election contests.
Well, you know what? I have my question on that one, but elaborate on that. Well, first of all, Kari Lake was sort of handed something of a setback. They filed the lawsuit before the midterms. I think it was in this, what month is it? It was in the summer, alleging that there were issues with prior voting in Arizona, alleging issues with the voting machines, untraceability of the votes, et cetera, before the midterms. That lawsuit was dismissed on a motion to dismiss, and then the defendants, which was Maricopa County and I forget who else, filed a motion for sanctions against both plaintiff Kari Lake and her attorneys, Dershowitz, from what I understand, and succeeded on the motion for sanctions, which was issued after the midterms, despite everything that we saw happening with Bill Gates talking about issues with the tabulators at 20% of the locations. Make it make sense, Robert. Like the motion for sanctions came to the conclusion that the allegations were so unsubstantiated, so frivolous, so unproven, even at whatever preliminary stage they were at, that they ought not have been made. So much so that not only was the plaintiff held liable for sanctions, which I think were the legal fees, so was their counsel. Can you make that make sense before we get into the new lawsuit arising after the incompetence of that day was borne out for the world to see?
It's the arrogant, power-hungry nature of a lot of judges who don't want lawyers raising certain cases, who don't want lawyers representing certain clients, and it's abusing, it's weaponizing and misusing and abusing their sanctions power, which I think I've seen enough of that I'm for long-term stripping judges of this power, period. They've proven incapable of using it in a manner that's ethical and honest and honorable. They use it for their political, partisan, personal prejudices on a routine, regular basis. No monetary judgment should ever be issued against anyone without trial by jury. That's what the whole civil forfeiture case going up in Indiana is all about. In my view, monetary judgments, you're constitutionally entitled to a jury trial by jury, whether it's $1 or $1 million. And the fact that it's being systematically denied by whether it's called contempt, whether it's called sanctions, whether it's called default, whatever it is, shows the courts will misuse and abuse any and every loophole to get around your right to trial by jury, because a jury trial would not have agreed with this. And so that's problem one, a systemic flaw that probably can only be remedied by the legislative branch making clear that in any monetary amount of judgment ever, there has to be a trial by jury before that can be reduced to judgment. Be honest with you, most judges would stop right there. They wouldn't even try to impanel juries to see whether they're right. They don't want the world to say expose them. So all of a sudden, all this nonsense would mostly go away. The second issue is the specifics. So here's a judge who didn't allow the case to go forward on standing grounds. So he didn't allow them to discover anything. He didn't allow them to prove their case. He never granted an evidentiary hearing on anything of consequence. So how does he know what the evidence shows? How does he know what it supports? He's full of it. He's lying on the bench. That's what a lot of these judges do. They lie. They like to lie. And judges are infamous for it. And it's one of the reasons, like in the old days, if you go to English courts to this day in some Caribbean jurisdictions, there's something called the duties of a deemster, D-E-E-M-S-T-E-R, where they have to recount all sides' arguments before they give their decision. If you go back to old U.S. court decisions, including state court decisions, you have to wait forever to get to the court decision because 90% of it is the court recounting both sides. What that did is that prevented them from lying with ease. The courts didn't like that because now they can create a fake factual pattern. They can create a fake argument pattern. They can set up a fake case, if you will. They can claim that these are the only issues. So you're like, oh, well, of course they came to that conclusion because these are the only issues. Judges like to lie. That's who they are down deep. Too often, too easily, too frequently. And so here you have an Obama hack judge who's so political, so partisan, that he denies them any chance at any discovery, denies them any chance at any hearing, denies them any chance at any remedy, and wants to make clear he wants to intimidate, misuse his power to terrorize and intimidate people from ever raising these questions again, saying your law license is going to be at risk. You're going to have to personally pay monies. Because it's really not about the sanctions monies. It's about the ethical consequence on the lawyer, trying to get their pals. You have the Texas bar group, the Texas people working for a conservative Texas Supreme Court. The disciplinary committee is a bunch of lefties. That's why they're going after Sidney Powell. They're going after the elected Attorney General of Texas. This is insanity. This is why we should get rid of licensures entirely. The courts have, think about the separation of powers. The separation of powers is the legislature writes the rules, the executive enforces the rules, and the judges just interpret the rules and adjudicate disputes. Not when it comes to the light practice of law. The judges write the rules, the judges enforce the rules, and the judges interpret and adjudge the rules. And who's most likely to expose corruption in our legal system? Lawyers. Are you going to be willing to expose it when those same judges can disbar you, can deprive you of your practice of your profession? No. That's why not only is licensure a bad idea in general, just require truth in advertising, don't require licensure. And number one, but number two, the way we license lawyers is an embarrassment. It's a disgrace to our system of justice, violates separation of powers. But who do you seek remedy from? Right? The courts. Do you think the courts are going to be like, no, we don't have that power? Nah, of course not. That they're as greedy for power as any politician is. And that's all these folks are, politicians with robes on. So it's an embarrassing ruling by an embarrassing court, but it shows the mindset. The goal is they think if they scream, shut up, or I'll smack you in the face, that people will stop raising questions about elections. All that does is increase doubt and skepticism about elections.
Well, I'll tell you this, it might have that impact on me. I don't know what impact it's going to have on Dershowitz. I mean, who can fight this fight at this point? Like they sanctioned Dersh, they sanctioned Kari Lake for the lawsuit that was filed prior to the absolute debacle that was the midterms, but the judge issues this decision after the debacle. What's the latest in terms of Kari Lake's? Well, first of all, I guess, what happens with this? Do they appeal the sanctions? Do they pay them? I mean, it's going to be legal fees.
I'm sure they'll appeal the sanctions on grounds they were misapplied in violation of due process principles, and it wasn't consistent with the rules and fair notice, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
And they have robust appeals. Does the Ninth Circuit care? Do they get a Ninth Circuit bunch of judges who want to double hammer these people, or do they get a conscientious court? That's always a roll of the dice, frankly. It's like Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome. What is justice? It's a spin of the wheel. It's a roll of the dice. So the 2 men enter, 1 man leave, and then you have a new rule that's announced when it's convenient. So the same dynamic in our legal system set. But Kari Lake has said she's bringing a full election contest once the certification goes through. Now, we've had some more wild stories out of Arizona. So, I mean, the big question for those out there, an election contest works pretty basic. Arizona has specific statutory legislative language that sets out the process. It's that you file it in state court. One thing that needs to be fixed is they need to allow those to go to courts outside of the state capitol, because the courts in the state capitol are overwhelmingly are not willing to second guess elections very often. So that's a mistake of some of the Republican legislatures in these branches. But putting that aside, the way an election contest works is you say there were rules violated. Number one, you don't have to prove fraud. That's a myth. That's a mistake. That's a misnomer. You just have to prove there were ballots counted that should not have been, and that the number of ballots counted exceed the margin of victory. You don't have to prove they would have voted for you. That's all you have to do. Ballots were counted that should not have been, or ballots were not counted that should have been. Either way, the ballot count is wrong for some reason. Either excluded ballots or wrongly included ballots or wrongly excluded ballots. And that the volume, the number of ballots, exceeds the margin of victory. That's it. Then your remedy is supposed to be a new election. That's the typical rules. Unlike Trump, who's still talking about other things.
We're going to get to that.
We'll get to what Trump's been talking about. But so she's going to bring it. She says she has done it the right way, Kari Lake. She's built a very deliberate case, gathered the evidence and accumulated it, is bringing it at the right procedural time to bring it, is detailing it, probably going to file like what we filed in Georgia for President Trump back in 2020, which was about 500 pages of exhibits, of documentary proof, affidavits, declarations, sworn statements under penalty of perjury, exhibits that document, detail, and demonstrate the scope and scale and severity of the issue, and that was more than the margin of victory in the state. The margin of victory is pretty small in Arizona in the governor's race, and so there's already an election contest brought in the attorney general's race while there's a recount going on at the same time there because the margin's even smaller. And so the big question is a simple one, And I think it's why Carrie Lake is being smart about publicly outing this Obama judge. What she wants is a judge who will just let the law be the law and follow the facts where they may be. Judges are scared to do it. And so she's highlighting, don't be like this political hack, because all you're going to do, if I was arguing her case in the court, it would be whatever you think. The only way you're going to restore confidence in our elections is to have a full evidentiary hearing. You are not going to restore confidence in our elections by telling people they're stupid, by telling people they're conspiracy theorists, by slapping them in the face. That will enrage them and lead them to believe that you as a legal system have failed, that you as a government have failed. And that will lead to, if you don't like January 6th, you're going to have 10 more January 6th if you go down this path. So the right way to do it is for the legal system to give confidence in our government, to give confidence in our legal system. Hold a transparent hearing. And if you think the evidence is crap at the end of the day, fine, say it's crap and rule against it. But have a full, transparent evidentiary hearing so we can all see. The big evidence appears to be, this has not been confirmed by enough sources yet, so I'll wait to see what is in Carrie Lake's election contest. But there are stories circulating that the reason why Maricopa County did not want to disclose how many voters checked in that day is because there is a gap of over 100,000 between the voters that checked in that day and ballots counted. And that's a major problem, meaning there's 100,000 votes at least short.
Yeah, well,
that's more, and the margin of victory is like 30,000.
Does that mean that there was 100,000 people who showed up but didn't end up voting, or who showed up?
Or whatever happened, their ballots disappeared. Okay. Their ballots were mixed in the wrong place. Their ballots weren't processed.
Well,
their ballots were excluded as being at two different precincts. Something happened that's the big gap that will win her case. If she can show more than the margin of victory, more than 30 or 40,000 people checked in to vote on election day, and yet their ballots were never counted, then that's a massive problem for Arizona that should lead, if you have a conscientious court, to a new election. And again, what I always tell people is, what's so horrible about that remedy? The remedy isn't, you're not giving Carrie Lake the governorship.
No, Robert,
you're just allowing an honest election to be conducted.
No, you've galvanized it. I won the first time. I don't need to do this a second time. But let me just make sure I understand that point. 100,000 people registered, and there were not 100,000 short on votes. If it were hypothetically the case that 3-hour lines, 100,000 people went home and did not vote, would that suffice?
Potentially, because it's voter suppression, because it's the failure of the voting machines to work correctly.
Okay.
And again, the Arizona courts complicated this by not letting the polling places be open late. They allowed them to be open on special days to give Warnock a special edge in Georgia. It looks like it's worked. He got a bunch of people to vote early who probably wouldn't have otherwise. There'll probably be the margin of victory in Georgia for Warnock because a judge intervened, and the Georgia Court of Appeals went and found the nearest desk and hid under it. And then the entire Georgia Supreme Court found an even bigger desk to hide under. That's what judges are good at in these kind of cases. When they're wrong on the election law, they hide. When they're wrong on the election law, but it helps Democrats, they're happy to sign the order. I mean, that's the, and they don't realize that yelling and screaming and lecturing people doesn't work anymore. Their moral authority is shrinking. And it's going to get really bad if they don't fix the Arizona court elections. People will be, they're building in a group of people that will become fatalistic about American democracy because of their not only their corruption, but their cowardice and incompetence.
Robert, I was listening, if you can believe this, I was listening to a Twitter hangout with Mark Elias. And I tune in to listen, but I didn't realize my face appears in that, and right up at the top of so Mark Elias, I may or may not have seen me listening, and I wasn't going to be an asshole and troll or anything. I wanted to hear the arguments, because one of the things they were discussing, Robert, was Katie Hobbs threatening to sue the whoever has to certify the vote. And I was listening to Mark Elias's explanation as to how the certification is in fact something they are legally required to do, such that if they choose not to do it for whatever the reason, they can be legally compelled to do it, because it has to do with only maintaining the impression of democracy, and it is not a right that they have to refuse to certify, and therefore they can legitimately be sued if they threaten to or refuse to certify. I know when I don't understand something, Robert. Is Mark Elias arguing something that's defensible, or is it a bastardization of the law?
It's more complicated than he's presenting it. And he's been on the opposite side of that in the past, telling people not to certify elections, by the way. So the certification, there were two controversies, actually three controversies that arose here. The first was that Kate Hobbs was identified as part of, like some people have been asking in the locals live chat about when will Twitter Files Part 2 come out.
Mm-hmm.
We'll see. I think Elon knows he's milking this for maximum marketability. He's a genius marketer, and he's proving that in spades. Quite frankly, if I was Trump, I'd be a little embarrassed. Musk has shown how you market something. Trump hasn't marketed truth anywhere nearly as effective as Musk has done. Musk is putting him to shame. Even with his trolling effort, he's making Trump look mediocre. So Trump's got to up his game to match Elon. Elon is still the maestro of the circus. He is the Barnum of Barnum and Bailey. But now I forgot what.
Oh no, the certification legally.
So the certification process. So Kate Hobbs came out that she was conspiring with Twitter to get rid of people questioning her on elections and related issues. It came out that she privately threatened people with potentially, apparently, arrest or imprisonment if they didn't go along with her directions in these election games. Photographs were put out by Richard Barris at People's Pundit daily. You can find them at Locals, at People's Pundit on Locals, that show that they were tracking where Republicans voted and where Democrats voted inside the election precincts. That's not supposed to ever happen, by the way. People are like, oh, they probably have, you don't do that. You don't track which party votes where. And then magically we have all the problems where you have a heat map showing that's where Republicans are going to vote. That's a big problem. But she was complicit in it, and it was inside a lot of the election because she was the Secretary of State. So she's refused to recuse herself. And so you have all of those scandals. And then you had one county that wasn't happy with how the election had gone, and so wanted to exercise their constitutional right to refuse to certify something that's not an actual honest election. And they were threatened. Now, can they be sued? Yes. The question is that a discretionary duty or a non-discretionary duty? It's not a ministerial duty.
It would be a mandamus that they would be.
Can't. I mean, they can sue for sure. But usually, what happens is the votes are thrown out potentially. But you can definitely sue to require them to certify the election if they have no grounds to refuse certification.
Okay.
But it is because they have discretion, but limited discretion. So he's wrong to say it's purely mandatory. Purely mandatory is something that's called a ministerial obligation. A ministerial obligation is you have no discretion whatsoever. You have to rubber stamp something, or you have to deliver the mail, right? That you don't have any discretion in choosing whether you're going to deliver the mail. That's a ministerial obligation. Certification is not a ministerial obligation. It is a discretionary obligation. Now, it's a discretionary obligation with limits on the exercise of that discretion, but by no means is it ministerial in the way he was.
No, that's because it sounded like it was only there to assure it's as a symbolic gesture, and it could be done.
He's right about how he uses it and how the Democratic Party uses it.
No, the idea, yeah. If you have no reasonable grounds and you're doing it purely abusively because you're the losing party, you say tough no because I'm not going to certify. Okay, you go to court, make that argument. Right. Okay. Because there was somebody.
They had legitimate grounds. They had legitimate grounds.
Well,
I mean, it was clear that they were they were going to be forced to fold. And it's going to go to the election contest portion to do something about it. And the big question is, will Arizona courts give people confidence in our court systems so that we can have confidence in our elections, or will they completely fail like they did in 2020?
All right. Well, we'll see there. I some funny chats in. All right, Robert, if we only have a few minutes left, because I hear some chatter outside.
Well, there's a little bit of there's both Trump and vaccine mandate news.
Well, let's do the Trump thing now, and we'll end with the vaccine news. Okay, you saw his post on Truth Social, and I read it. I read it multiple times, and I said, look, okay, my understanding of it, he says this was a fraudulent election, and it can call for the termination of all rules, articles, etc., even those found in the Constitution. First of all, okay, dude's pissed and he's ranting. I got very suspicious when the media, all of a sudden, they're talking about Trump threatening to terminate the Constitution when the Twitter files literally revealed that they effectively said, what was it? The First Amendment is not absolute. So they are accusing Trump, who may have given them the grounds to do so in a Truth Social post, of doing exactly what was just revealed that they had done. So they have to divert, distract, etc. I heard some people interpreting Trump's Truth Social to say he's not saying to do it. He's just saying that it's, fraud vitiates everything. That I can understand. Okay. Still think it's poor wording, fodder for people who want to make him look like a crazy man. I would have gone with the argument that he wasn't saying terminate the Constitution, but rather terminate the articles or regulations, which might be incidental to the Constitution itself, which the Constitution might say you have to overturn these articles because they were articles based on fraud, whatever. What's your take on Trump's post? And people will say that you're partisan, you like Trump, and you've been a Trump supporter. But I trust you enough to be objective, and if I think I'll see what I think of your answer. How do you interpret his post?
I think your analysis is precisely right. So it goes to like the book Ratification behind me by Pauline Meyer about those debates. And Trump's core argument is that the strict technical provisions of the Constitution were meant to enforce an honest election, not meant to authorize and ratify a dishonest election. Now, that's how he should have put it, right? But now also you never know with Trump whether he says, if I use this language, I bet I get the media to cover it. And often he does that deliberately because he thinks if they're talking about an issue that's favorable to him in his mind, that's net plus, even if the means by which they did so was something that sounded real controversial at the top. So he thinks if people are talking about whether 2020 was an honest election, then Trump thinks he wins that debate. Doesn't matter how they're talking about it or why they're talking about it. Trump has often had that modus operandi. So that may be the political strategy he was employing. I would say as a general rule, and that's why he may have used the inflammatory language of terminate and Constitution in the same sentence. I would never put those two words in the same sentence. So and as to his principle that the Constitution should be interpreted in the spirit of the founders, meaning that it's about honest elections and everything should be done to assure honest elections. I get it. The reality is we set up a procedural remedy for that, and our procedural remedy we locked in for a reason. We did not want 2 years later presidents getting thrown out on somebody's grounds that didn't happen at the time. It's just I disagree with Trump on that. I think the bottom line is, and part of this is on him. It's not just. I mean, at one point I was going to run all the election contests for him. He and his chief of staff had both supported me in that capacity, and it was Romney McDaniel, the Republican National Committee chairman, who Trump had, I think, foolishly delegated everything related to campaigns about, who blocked me. So I'm very encouraged to see both Lee Zeldin and Harmeet Dillon likely to challenge her as Republican National Committee chairwoman. But the strategy, the people that I was with were talking about, not just me, a bunch of really smart, sophisticated people, was to take this to Congress, to establish in Congress, to do the Supreme Court challenge, but recognize Supreme Court was likely going to hide, but use the foundation of that Supreme Court challenge to go to Congress and build that up in advance and focus on things like signature matches and whether it was a constitutional election, get away from machines and all this other stuff that made his people sound like they were idiots and would often repeat just basically false stuff. I mean, I'll give an example. There's a popular meme out there. When Jill Biden was about to give her speech at the Democratic National Convention, she tweeted out an early photo of her and Joe Biden when she is 23 and he's like 33. Somebody smart as a troll put up on Facebook that this was really Joe Biden when he was 33, but she was 15 and she was his babysitter. That's all false. It's always false. She was never his babysitter. The ages don't even overlap. Time periods don't overlap. That was something done. And I get it for fun, but so many people have repeated it that think it's true. What it does is it helps discredit critics, questioners, because they're caught endorsing something that about 5 minutes of research could have told them wasn't accurate. And so that's what a lot of the machine stuff did. So I think in that sense, Trump's words were not well chosen. I also think that, and this is also on him, because the other thing was some of us encouraged him. Okay, if you're serious about elections, you want to keep it in the news. Create a think tank that supports election integrity and nothing else. Help fundraise for it. Be active for it. Let's change state laws related to it. Trump did none of those things. So, that's really on Trump. And so the people that are critics of Trump will see that comment, his truth post, and say he's still obsessed with 2020, even though in his announcement speech he almost never talked about 2020 election. So it's like, so I get what I think he's trying to throw is recirculate the story with the context of Trump, but I don't think he's always doing it in the most effective way for his own purposes.
Okay, good. I feel somewhat. I thought I totally misunderstood something, and what he was saying was totally sound. It's just amazing that it's the diversion of the media that they're now trying to say that Trump is unfit for having suggested something that they insisted upon and basically stated outright in 2020. The First Amendment is not absolute, as though that's not part of the Constitution.
I do like the meme on our one of our tippers on the locals board that the statement is, "Hey, we're still complying, so everything's fine, right?" And it's people lining up to get on the trains. So it's a good reminder. Compliance doesn't really get you to where you want to go.
Well, there is the expression: you cannot comply your way out of tyranny, and you can vote yourself into it, but you have
a good Robert Kennedy quote. Which is now the other Trump news was the 11th Circuit. It showed how fearful they are of the deep state. They're like, oh, we can't afford any special master into these very, very important or secret records, even though 99% of them are not secret records. And so they threw out the special master, which shows you the deep state fear and intimidation with so many federal judges, and that may go up to the U.S. Supreme Court. But as Mike Davis pointed out, the real challenge was never the special master issue. The real challenge is him filing a request for return of seized property. And that hasn't been done yet. And once that's done, then maybe the courts will step up. Mike Davis's prediction in our sidebar was that he thinks U.S. Supreme Court will take that case. And I hope they do, because the 11th Circuit has shown themselves to be some scaredy cats when it comes to taking on the deep state, sadly.
I just wonder if it's not obscure, but rather too specific that it doesn't have national import. I mean, I appreciate the argument for why it would be important for the nation for the future, but I can see them saying,
well, it's really about checking the deep state's power, and the courts are like, oh, no, please. That's who the courts really are. We've seen multiple examples of that in a range of contexts where courts are just, even the conservative judges are intimidated when it comes to prosecutorial power and police power, especially. Which is sad. I mean, it's like the reason why I think they'll make a good ruling in the Colorado case is because we got 7 Catholics on the court. But it's also why we're probably going to be waiting a while for them to make a vaccine decision, because the Pope was fine with the vaccine. Notre Dame is requiring it as a condition to be on campus. So, I've been telling some of my conservative friends, can we please put some non-Catholics on the bench? Nothing against all my Catholic friends out there. It's just saying as a whole, when it comes to judges especially, they tend to be very authority deferential. And they only stand up when there's a conflict between the church and the state. They don't tend to stand up for the individual against the state or against the church. And so we'll see if, but in the, we'll see what happens in that. I think it's the Australian case, is it, about the baby?
Oh, New Zealand. Yeah, well, that's coming up. What's the date? That's tomorrow, whether or not they're going to take the kid away. This is for those of you who don't know. I talked about it briefly yesterday because there was developments, but 4-month-old kid has a heart problem. The parents want unvaccinated blood. The medical system says we don't distinguish between the two. So tough nuggies eat it. They said, well, let's coordinate this. It's a serious heart condition. The kid needs to be treated. We'll talk about that tomorrow, because I think there's going to be news on the hearing tomorrow. So we'll see what happens. They're in the future in New Zealand, so we'll know about it by the time it's done. Good
6th Circuit case affirmed the injunction against the Air Force. There's more pressure on the Biden administration to drop the defense because they keep losing in court. They lost now in Ohio, Texas, and Florida. They've now lost before the 6th Circuit Court of Appeals. I think they'll lose before the 5th and the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. So it looks like ultimately a lot of these mandates on the military will ultimately be found to violate religious rights when religious exemptions were not recognized and respected. So that was a good sign, very good decision. I'll be posting a highlighted version of the decision later this week at vivabarneslaw.locals.com.
I don't know which side it is. I can't see this one right there. That's where it is. No, there's that one.
We got to get the little one to say Viva Barneslaw.locals.com.
He'll swarm me in a few minutes.
And then we're waiting on the FDA case, against the Children's Health Defense versus FDA, about the big one about whether the court will allow that to go forward to to stop the FDA from constantly lying about how a drug is safe, effective, and a vaccine when it's not safe, not effective, and not a vaccine, and claiming that they can do all of it as an emergency facing children from COVID when there is no emergency facing children from COVID. So we'll see what the federal district court there in Waco, Texas does. And same waiting on in the Brooke Jackson case, waiting on the court to rule on a big decision there. Range of Tyson Foods cases, waiting on the courts to make decisions there. And I have brought, about another half dozen cases against a range of companies across the country in the past 2 weeks, South Dakota to Illinois to Oklahoma to Texas, et cetera, over these various vaccine mandate discriminatory policies. So no major updates yet. We're in a waiting position in most of those cases.
Brooke Jackson tweeted out, Pfizer, I own you. And I was curious as to what she meant by that, but I'm not sure it's a question.
What she means is that she's exposed who they are and what they're about.
Okay.
And so that they are and they radicalized her. I mean, she is someone who's been a long time clinical director or clinical employee, clinical trial employee, to make sure audits, she was a deep believer. I mean, as she has publicly stated, she took the Moderna vaccine. She didn't realize that they had the same problems as Pfizer. And she's been shocked by what she has witnessed. She was shocked by what she witnessed at Pfizer, but she's even been more shocked at what she has witnessed by our federal government not being proactively involved, misleading her into believing they were going to do something when they didn't, about the way Pfizer's, gone after her and attacked her in a range of contexts. So, it's Bill Gates, if Bill Gates' objective was to popularize vaccine mandates, it's backfired badly by what has happened.
There's no question, Robert. I now question things that I would have never questioned before. By the way, it reminds me, before I forget, you've read a bunch. Have you read anything that would support the idea that there is potentially a risk of getting a transfusion with vaccinated blood? Like, not medical advice, everybody out there.
Yeah, I know Peter McCullough has suggested, at least in some context, some risks. So that there might be risks. I know a friend of mine who is concerned that once they initially said breast milk couldn't cause anything, and then his son had problems after the mother got the vaccine. And then of course it came out later, maybe there could be problems. So under the same logic as that and what Peter McCullough is talking about, I could see that maybe there's some transfusion risk. I mean, what ordinary people right now is there's almost no one they can trust. That's part of our suit against the FDA. It's saying, look, they have destroyed trust in public health in America for millions and millions of families. And we've got to force them to do their job and not lie so we can restore some of that trust and confidence.
I was reading some articles and I'm trying to get an answer on it. And, in New Zealand, they're saying doctor said no risk, that there's maybe trace amounts of something in the blood for a few days afterwards, but they filter it out. The problem is now I don't trust them, period. In fact, and for the conspiracy theorists of 2 years ago who have now turned out to be right, who are now saying something that has yet to be proven to be right, I'm just reading the tea leaves as they've been predictive for the last 2 years. And when the doctor said you don't need a mask, it's good for breastfeeding, it won't affect your period, and then 2 years later, the conspiracy theorists turned out to be right. Now I'm very reluctant to write anybody off, and I'm very reluctant to trust the experts who say no risk whatsoever. Shut up and take the blood.
I mean, at a minimum, that family should be allowed to choose what they want for their baby.
The question is whether or not there's an alternative. If it's a dire emergency and there's no alternative.
Oh, and I understand that. But here, the people step forward to donate blood that match, and they won't allow it to happen. It's like, this is insanity. It's like the Amos Miller case where you have the U.S. Department of Agriculture trying to dictate what we can eat. That's not their role. Their role is to make sure the label is right, not to tell me what I can't and can't eat. And so just like the FDA trying to just make sure the label's right. You're not supposed to lie to me about a drug. You're not supposed to dictate to me what drug I can and can't take. That's not what the role was ever supposed to be. When the government has a monopoly on power, it never ends well.
Good place to end. 2 hours on the nose. But Robert, kids not coming in to say vivabarneslaw.locals.com. But people, if you want to support the channel, locals, vivabarneslaw.locals.com. You could be a member. Our community is now over 100. I think it's close to 110,000. That's just members. You could choose to support if you so choose. $70 a year, and you get tons of exclusive content. But I still think one of the best ways to support with pride Hold on. Where is it? Where is it? Oh, what the? Hold on. It was right here. Refresh. Oh, hold on. Well, Viva, I wanted to show the mug, but Robert, if you want a shirt for Christmas, okay, I don't think the website's, I hope it's not overloaded, because vivafrei.com, you can get all the best merch, but we've got something that's even more special now. It's it's good. We might blow up the webpage. Ziggy Shrugged has custom stuff that she's been using. She's been making for Eric Hunley, for Nate the lawyer. I don't know if our Christmas ornament stuff is up yet, but it will be up. And it's going to look like this. Let me just see if we go along. They got Oswald the dog for Mark Robert and Eric Hunley. Nate Brody. If you want dreidels and Christmas ornaments, it's at creationsbyziggy.com. There's going to be a ton of artisanal stuff made by a Floridian. And it's fantastic stuff. So there's a lot of Christmas gift ideas for anybody who wants to support the channel.
Oh yeah, Ziggy's great. So you'll have some hush hush ornaments you can put on the Christmas tree, and then some T-shirts and some other stuff will also be up. But some of that will be up at Ziggy's site. Some of it will be up at vivafrei.com. But there'll be nice Christmas gifts. Everybody likes to get you get your pajamas and T-shirt ready for Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day. So we got to have some Viva stuff, some Viva Barn stuff, and we'll have all of it available to you soon.
You can get your dreidels, people, and then you can sing the song, the dreidel song. But I tell you, the politics ruins everything shirt. Every time I wear it, somebody says, "I love that shirt."
And you guys celebrate Christmas, right?
I celebrate Christmas because I love Christmas, because it's not I understand there's the religious aspect to it. There's a part of it that's just a damn good excuse to get presents, be merry. Although this is going to be it'll be the second Christmas of my life that will be spent outside of Canada. The other one was in Florida.
Your first Florida Christmas.
I had one in 1990. Whenever Dances with Wolves came out, was the only other Christmas we ever had, not in my parents' cottage. It'll be, oh no, but we're going back to Canada. Never mind. I'm going back for Christmas. I'm an idiot. Robert, do we have a sidebar on Wednesday?
Not yet, but we may.
Okay, we'll get something good, people. Stay tuned. Tomorrow, Robert, if you can make it, Carl Benjamin, 4:00 Eastern time.
Oh, sweet.
It's going to
be the sidebar for the week then.
Well, it was a last minute thing, and it worked out well. So I'll send you the link. I haven't created a link yet. Tomorrow, 4:00, going to be amazing. And we'll get something for Wednesday. Robert, what do you have on for this week? Appearances?
No, I just got a lot of work.
Okay. Well, no rest for the wicked, as they say. Robert, it's good to see you again. Everybody out there, thank you very much. Links will be in the pin comment, yada, yada. You know what to do. See you tomorrow. See you this week. Enjoy it.